When I was a kid, I heard this popular old song sung by a very famous frog. At face value, it was just a cute little children's song, which happened to be sung by a Muppet that was playing banjo, sitting on a lily pad somewhere in a swamp. Who said that every wish should be heard and answered when wished on the morning star? That's how the lyrics go. The frog goes on to sing, somebody thought of that and someone believed it, and look what it's done so far. I never realized before that frogs deliberate over these types of deep, meaningful, existential quandaries with such great angst. Well, I guess frogs really do have a lot of time to ponder over these types of things. I mean, they aren't knee-deep in distractions like we are. There's no frog tube or frog talk intentionally engineered to distract amphibians from living the best life that they can. And frogs tend to live in places where there's less light pollution, so they most likely have a better view of the stars. And Kermit the Frog must have had plenty of time to sit and stare up at those stars and just wonder, what's so amazing that keeps us stargazing? What do we think we might see? It's a fascinating question. Why do we stare up at the stars? They're just stationary. They don't move. They really aren't even interesting at all. They're just blurry blobs of gas and fire that are so far away that they just look like little tiny dots from here. And yet, when we're in the right mood, we can just lie on our backs and stare up at them, hoping for something to happen. Maybe a planet in a different place than it was in previous weeks. A shooting star here and there. Elon Musk playing with his billions of dollars of space toys. But the truth is, there's something much deeper to it. We're staring up at the night sky hoping for some kind of guidance or something. Like hoping for meaning. We're waiting for whoever left us here to come back and get us. And the night sky lets our imagination run wild about who that might be. The song I'm talking about is called The Rainbow Connection. And apparently it wasn't actually written by a Muppet Frog, but by two human songwriters named Paul Williams and Kenneth Asher. Williams also co-wrote 70s hits like Three Dog Night's Old Fashioned Love Song and The Carpenters' We've Only Just Begun. And Asher created the keyboards and string parts for John Lennon's song Mind Games, if you've ever heard that one. One of my favorites. He was also involved in creating a lot of other popular songs at the time as well. I think that was all back in the 70s, maybe early 80s as well. The Rainbow Connection itself, though, was written for Jim Henson's 1979 film, The Muppet Movie, and it actually hit Billboard's top 25 and stayed there for a while, which was apparently surprising to everybody involved. When I first heard the song, I was way too young to really understand what the song was about. But it wasn't until much later, when I heard Sarah McLachlan's remake of the song, that I was really quite mesmerized by the lyrics. The song was written for a kids' movie, but they really weren't little kids' lyrics. At least not in my mind. Depending on where you live, the stars in the sky were so much more important to everyday life in ancient civilizations than they are to us now. We're disconnected from the universe nowadays because of light pollution, because, appropriately, we want to be safer at night. Wisely, many of us have traded that sense of connection to the universe for a better sense of security. Meanwhile, out in the swamp, where the stars light up the night sky, Kermit the Frog in the third verse of this ridiculous song starts spiraling into some sort of lunacy. Have you ever been half asleep and started hearing voices? He asks. I have. I've heard them calling my name, he tries to explain. I'm starting to question the sanity of this talking frog. He says, I've heard it, referring to the voices. Way too many times to ignore it. It's something that I'm supposed to be. Is this the same sweet sound, he asks, that called the young sailors? The voice might be one and the same. So, what is it that makes some people get up and just leave everything that they've ever known behind in search of a better life? or at least a different life. It seems like a really risky endeavor to do that. Imagine immigrants in old times who just picked up and left Europe or Asia before the internet, before telephones, before photography, and just left everything behind to go to a place that they'd never been before. Some of them probably got scammed. Some were probably killed by natives. Imagine how brave or maybe desperate or maybe just kind of naive they must have been in order to take such a risk. To trade everything they've ever known in exchange for what the great unknown could potentially provide. And in many cases, they probably didn't have the means to go back if things didn't work out the way that they hoped it would. What drove them to leave everything behind? Was it adventure? Was it money? Was it glory? Was it the promise of a better life? Was it some kind of brokenness within them? Were they tortured souls who had never found the happiness and fulfillment that they'd hoped to find in the places that they'd previously been? I regularly see this old saying being thrown around on the internet that goes something like, before you attempt to escape from your environment, remember that everywhere you go, there you are. It's a cautionary tale of trying to escape from the problems that you yourself create everywhere you go. It's a wise thing to consider when making life changes. You might, in fact, be the common denominator that actually caused 100% of the places that you've ever lived before to become the type of hell that you eventually found yourself needing to desperately escape from. But I think that there are other ways to look at this as well. People everywhere become complacent and stuck in their routines. Everywhere you go, you'll find people creating drama, corrupting your quality of life, and corrupting your community too. There are so many disappointing people out there, so many disappointing outcomes, and it's easy for some, the rovers, the wanderers, the nomads, the vagabonds, call them what you will, shout out to Metallica, to just move on when life becomes corrupted and to just start over again. It's actually more tempting to follow these voices that we hear while we're lying in bed half asleep than it is to endure the frustration of stagnancy in a place where life just isn't as good as we know it could potentially be. I recently heard this song that I'd never actually heard before. The song is called Tear It Down, and it's by a Canadian band called Major Love. The lyrics to that song go like this. People watching, are you working? Where does the time go when it all comes to nothing? And I can see how you are progressing, building up your window dressing. But I am more inclined to tear it down, 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 and just start over. And he goes on to say, Old Mother Nature, how goes the proverb? She giveth the bread, and then she taketh. She steals the earth, and then she quaketh. And life is just what you make it. And if you don't like what you have made, then tear it down, down, down. Just tear it down and start over. Now, imagine that inner torment that someone must feel in order to be able to give up everything that they've ever known, that they've ever worked towards, the relationships that they have built, the progress that they have made, giving up all of this in order to scour the earth in hopes of finding whatever it is that they are looking for, to wander through the unknown, searching feverishly for that which they have yet to find. It's a strange thing because some people never leave their hometown, and yet somehow they still find that thing, that meaning that the rest of us crave, whatever that thing is. To find that contentment is, it's such it's a disposition that's worthy of being envious of. But for the rest of us, we think about how there are so many lives that we could be living. So many different realities. And yet, we can only choose to experience one of them for ourselves. Or maybe not. It always fascinates me when people talk about the multiverse. Imagine the version of myself who chose a different reality and who is living a completely different existence. What is his life like? Did he do better for himself or did he do worse? There's really no way to ever know, right? Except that I recently decided to restart the simulation. Just like in that song by Major Love, I realized that life had become what I made it, and it occurred to me that I didn't like what I had made. So I tore it all down, and I just started over. I made this humongous move in my life, one where I just kind of left everything behind in an attempt at just starting from scratch. It wasn't that my old life was completely horrible. I mean, I have amazing friends and family that I love in the old place, and I still keep in contact with them. And I've always kind of been the type of person who tends to make lemonade out of lemons wherever I go to try to make the best out of my situation. But I hadn't really been truly happy for a while. And it's not like I had somebody there who was relying on me or anything, so I wasn't abandoning a serious relationship or anything. I recently saw something online from Dr. John Delony, who happens to be one of my favorite podcast hosts. And he spoke about his perspective on this kind of scenario that I'm talking about. And he says, over the past 2 decades, I have engaged in countless conversations with folks who are thinking about breaking up long-term relationships, quitting their jobs, or constantly searching for new ones, getting a new car, moving to a new town, getting another tattoo and another tattoo and another tattoo, and so forth and so on. It seems like that there is this persuasive cultural illusion that joy, peace, and an endless stream of happiness is always somewhere else, or with someone else. Baked into our cultural ethos is this assumption that no matter what you have or who you have it with, things are always better somewhere else. And honestly, that may be true. But before you break up, he says, quit, move, or numb things out through buying, hiding, or running. Just remember, when you cross that finish line, you will still be you. When you hold hands with someone new, you will still be you. When you walk in the door of your new apartment, the reflection in the mirror will still be you. Before you cut and run, ask yourself if you are whole. Ask yourself if you are contributing to your own misery. Be honest with yourself and ask if part of the problems in your life might be with how you are choosing to move through space. Wherever you go, he says, I want you to carry with you core tenets of dignity, laughter, and worthiness. The crazy thing is, when you know and own these things deep inside your being, you will often find love, peace, and belonging right where you are standing. When we're whole, Dr. Delony says, the grass has a way of greening up right under our feet. And that's good stuff from Dr. Delony on his Facebook page, I think it was. And this is something that I myself have been debating internally for a while now. And as I read this, I thought about how if I'd stayed in my old version of the multiverse, I would have been trudging through snow at that very moment as I was reading, mentally exhausted by months of miserable weather, surrounded by other mentally exhausted people. In the old version of my multiverse, there wasn't even any grass to be green. It was buried under 2 feet of ice and snow that I had to trudge through every day. And the high temperature on the day that I left was in the low 20s. It had been miserable for weeks. And even when it warmed up past freezing, it would just start to rain. So, on that same day when I happened to read what Dr. Delony had shared, I'd woken up in my new reality. I went out into this new space near where I lived. And I enjoyed exploring a beach town near the ocean. I was surrounded by palm trees and perfect weather. I was experiencing one of those many other realities that can exist. I was living an adventure that I had never lived before, instead of existing within that old reality, which, honestly, in hindsight, was an existence in which I was never particularly thriving. Will I bring my old misery with me to the new place? Will that dark cloud that always hung over my head in the previous place eventually find me here in the new one? Due to my own actions and my own behaviors? I mean, it's possible. On the flip side, though, I have intentionally and strategically placed myself in an environment where I can better succeed. At least hopefully. And if that old dark cloud does choose to follow me here, maybe I'll just go ahead and move on to the next place. Tear it all down and start over again. Because for the first time in a long time, I now find myself smiling in the mornings. I find myself excited about going out and having a new adventure. At least for now, I'm happy in this new reality. And the other option was staying in the old reality where I already knew that I was not happy. I blame the old place for my unhappiness, rightfully so or not. It was a place where I never intended to be, but I got so caught up in trying to make lemonade from lemons that I forgot that I had never intended to take those lemons in the first place. It was never advantageous to my disposition to be in that place to begin with. So I just set the lemons down. And finally I woke up to reality, and I decided to make a change. A change towards happiness for however long that lasts. Here's the thing. As much as it's true that we can all be our worst enemies, polluting our own environment to the point where it becomes hard to even continue living in, the reality is that some situations are just better than others. Some environments are just not that great. How does it benefit us to stay in places where we know that we could be doing better? And just like Kermit the Frog says in that song, some of us have heard that voice that calls us to move on, and we've already heard it way too many times to ignore it. And if that inner voice is calling us towards something else, something that we're supposed to be, and we don't have a legitimate reason not to follow it, how dare we continue to ignore it? How can we possibly live with ourselves if we don't even at least try to pursue a greater existence if we're being called elsewhere? You've been listening to The Great Beginner Galactic, and see you next time. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com. TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic. Or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.